Hello friends, this is Jamie, and every other Thursday this winter, I'm hosting a book club that you can find on sexpositiveworld.org/events. The book we're reading is The Different Drum by Peck MD, and it's all about community building and peace. Now every week we're going to go look at different portions of the book, and this is the first one of 6 that's going to talk about the book. So tonight we're going to talk about the intro, chapters 1 and chapter 2. So let's start with the prologue. It begins with a story called The Rabbi's Gift. It begins talking about this Masonic order where there's a bunch of monks living out there in the woods in this monastery, otherwise known as an abbot. Lots of terms I hadn't really learned before. And what's happening there is a common story. Like, no one new is showing up, and all of the leadership is aging out, and no new people are really showing up to take over this order. And they're very distressed about it. And there's a town nearby where they do have a rabbi who comes out into the woods and stays sometime in a cabin. So one of the monks kind of psychically figures out that the rabbi is there and decides to go visit him and ask for some advice. So the monk asks the rabbi what to do about the fact that their order is dying. And the rabbi basically says, the same thing is happening in the town. We're just seeing people leave. And they weep together, they keep talking, and at the end of it, the monk says to the rabbi, I really didn't come here for the knowledge I was looking for. And the rabbi replies to him with this: all I can tell you is the Messiah is among you. The monk walks away, he goes back to the order and starts thinking it through after telling all of the other monks about it. And he thinks, well, surely it's the leader of our order because he's the most holy. Or maybe it's this other guy who is really passionate and takes care of people. And surely it's not this one because he's kind of a thorn in your side. But then again, he is like really great in these other ways. And could it be me? Like, if it was, surely not me, but it could be me. And through this, what you see is the monks start treating each other with extreme respect. So in the end, people end up coming and visiting the order and being so blown away by the mutual respect and the love within the walls, they actually end up sticking around. And that's the end of the rabbi's gift. A lot of people have trouble with the religious tones of the story, but I don't want to get stuck in all of that because frankly, this book has a lot of religious tones because I believe religious groups tend to be a lot more focused on how to build community because they all get together and tend to worship the same God. So it makes sense that you want to be in community with those people. If you look at the Christian church in the Bible, it even explicitly talks about the importance of community in the book of Acts. But I don't want that to turn off the audience because community can truly be built anywhere. And that's what this book is all about, is saying you can build community anywhere, and here's sort of what we're looking for when we do that and how to make it happen. So let's get actually into the book, into chapter 1. Just kidding, it's not chapter 1, it's the introduction, where Peck immediately states that community is this thing that's really hard to define. And in fact, a lot of people have never even experienced it, so it can be difficult to describe to somebody else, like describing a piece of artwork that someone has never seen. So how do you actually quantitate or describe what a community actually is? Community is a word that's been distorted. We may think of our hometowns, churches, sex-positive world, but are these communities? We sometimes mourn the good old days or some kind of dream community back when we relied on our neighbors for survival in the harsh winter, or farmers getting together to build each other's barns. But was that community back then? How would we know? Peck quotes John Winthrop from 1630. We must delight in each other, make each other's conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our community as members of the same body. What this suggests is that we actually were at some point more of a community. Now, we then go forward looking about 200 years into democracy in America, which quotes that this idea of individualism, which they say will eventually fragment society, causing isolation if not balanced with other habits. Peck talks about his own childhood home, giving examples that anxiety and worry were not mentioned, and that sadness somehow seemed like a feminine quality that he was not allowed to express. The family, they saw themselves as good, rugged Americans, and they expected the same from their son. This made for an environment that was definitely secure, but it wasn't safe because you couldn't fully express yourself. So Peck talks about developing this kind of like anxiety about having anxiety, depression about having depression. And it's only through his ability to embrace those emotions later in life and accept that those are part of who he is, that he's able to move on from that and actually feel good in his own body, as opposed to having to take medications or just be disabled by the whole process. So the first community that Peck describes to us is Friends Seminary. He describes it as he had come from the school where there was no coddling and a lot of structure, and then into this place called Friends Seminary, and it felt like coming home, which for me is a feeling that I tend to associate with community, that sort of like relief and happiness that you feel when you walk in the door of your own home. Hopefully you feel that when you walk into your own home. This environment where he's no longer forced to fit in a box actually allows him to go from struggling in school to really thriving in school. And some differences that were there were some softer boundaries with authority, like they could tease and joke with the teachers, no dress codes, no cliques, and he has this recollection of really being able to be himself. Now, the ability to be yourself, I think, is one of the most important things in community, that there aren't pieces of you that are allowed and pieces of you that are not. Next, let's look at his experience as a psych student. So Peck is now officially in a community building group, in a psych group that's all talking about sleep. So they're trying to get an impossible amount of work done with very little sleep. He immediately takes issue with this other guy who's just boisterous and smoking stinky cigars, and realizes in his own anger and through fatigue that actually they have quite a lot in common, and he adds a lot to the group, and that maybe there's some grace for this person. And although no one in the group really seems to care very much, they continue getting the work done, they come back together, and Peck then he's feeling this depression and calls it out, and someone in the group suggests that perhaps he is feeling that emotion for the whole. The notion that he is the group's depression, and that's kind of what he's feeling right now, is to be a part of this for the whole, is actually laughed at by the group. They dismiss it, they tell him deal with your depression on your own time and continue on with the project. They continue on, and things get kind of isolated and nasty, and the group goes from some kind of cohesion to really feeling very structured and not very into each other. The leader speaks up for the first time in 6 hours and points out the tone of the group has completely changed. No laughter, no smiling, since Peck had voiced his depression. It starts with everyone confessing their own sorrow, people missing the people at home, resenting the location that they're at, all the other complaints that come with it. And it takes the group, after emptying themselves of all of those feelings, back to a place where they could be happy and be together. And then Peck is transformed from pariah to prophet. Prophets being those that bear bad news for society that needs to change. In the last part of the chapter, Peck talks about his time in Okinawa, and if you'd like to read that, I suggest you go to the book. I'm going to go ahead and move on to chapter 2. Chapter 2, Individuals and the Fallacy of Rugged Individualism. This chapter begins with the line, "I am lonely." I think most of us have felt that feeling because we are indeed individuals. We're not connected to others 100% of the time. You are going to experience some amount of aloneness, and with aloneness comes loneliness, because they are actually two different things. We go on to talk about Carl Jung, who uses the concept that the goal of a person is individualism, defining yourself entirely, intentionally as an individual. He also says that many of us actually don't get to the point of individualism because we allow ourselves to be defined by our culture, our parents, and the values that have been given to us by society, rather than ever defining them for ourselves. So the important thing that needs to happen is that we eventually question that things that we've been handed as individuals, and we then make our choices based on personal ethics, and that to not do so is to live in a world where you are stereotyping and typically lazy and just taking what's given to you from society. And while it is a piece of the puzzle when it comes to being a good individual, there is more to it when it comes to community. Peck says, the reality is that you can't be everything to yourself. You cannot be your own physician. You can't be your own lawyer and politician and social worker and therapist. The reality is that we need other people in order to survive on a visceral level, and in modernity, because we need ways to work together to actually get things done. Peck also states that we as individuals actually have a desire for community that goes beyond the physical need for each other. And when it comes to people coming together, recognizing that we have strengths and weaknesses, where one person may be highly structured and very detail-oriented, another may be very fun-loving and not really care about timing and so on, but they each play an important role in making space for everyone within a community. So recognizing each other's strengths, weaknesses, and individual qualities and admiring them is a piece of community. Peck suggests that we need to develop a soft individualism as opposed to rugged. We cannot truly be ourselves until we're able to share freely the things we most have in common: our weaknesses, our incompleteness, our imperfection, our inadequacy, our sins, our lack of wholeness, and self-sufficiency. And that's kind of the end of chapter 2. I have to say I generally agree with Peck. I found community in a number of places in my life. I definitely found it in youth groups when I was going to church when I was a teenager. And these days I find it definitely within Sex Positive World. I'm gonna explicitly state towards the book club, because that's a group where we've really been able to fully see each other. We've read through 5 books at this point, or rather, this is our 5th book. And that's a group where we have had disagreements. We've had to work through seeing things from other people's angle. And there's been a lot more acceptance and ability to really go to the deep, dark places and find healing with each other. That to me is also part of what defines a community, because that's how we fill gaps for each other in that kind of like, you can't be everything just for yourself. So in a couple weeks, I'll be back with chapters 3 through 5. That includes the true meaning of community, the genesis of community, and stages of community making. You can always show up and actually be part of the virtual call. If you're interested, go to sexpositiveworld.org/events to get signed up. You can also find more content like this and about how we want to structure society in my other shows that I have on YouTube. Look for Give and Consent. You can also find me on Facebook and YouTube. And if you really love what I do, I've also got a Patreon. I would love to have you as a patron. Until next time, my friends, love you more.